Peace be upon you, and welcome to a new episode. If someone helped you during the weakest moment of your life and stood by your side for many years without ever expecting anything in return, could that same person one day be the one who would lead you to the final moments of your life? It's a strange question, but that is exactly what happened to a man who never imagined that his kindness could one day become the reason for his death. His body was found more than 600 kilometers away from his home, in an area where nobody knew him or even knew where he had come from. There was no clue revealing who he was or what he was doing there in the first place. The story began in February 2025 in Beheira Governorate, specifically in the Abu El Matamir area. Everything seemed completely normal. It was just an ordinary day in the area until a report suddenly reached the Abu El Matamir police station from some local residents. Their voices were confused and anxious as they reported that the body of a man had been found lying near some houses. The man was not a resident of the area, and no one had ever seen him before or knew who he was. Security forces immediately went to the crime scene, cordoned off the area, and began the procedures to identify the victim and conduct an initial examination. The scene was shocking to everyone. A man lying on the ground, with facial features suggesting that he had gone through terrifying final moments before losing his life. After some preliminary investigations, authorities discovered that the body belonged to a man in his 50s named Fatih Osman, who lived in Siwa Oasis, part of Matru Governorate. And this is where the first mystery we mentioned at the beginning emerged. How could a man from Siwa end up dead in Beheira when the distance between the two locations is more than 600 kilometers, a journey that takes around 8 full hours by car? Why would a man from the far western part of Egypt travel all that way? And who was waiting for him there? To understand the story from the beginning, the police contacted their colleagues in Matru Governorate so they could speak with Fatih's family and gather any information that might help the investigation. That was when they learned that Fatih was a married man and the father of 9 children, 7 daughters and 2 sons. He had a very large family and was their sole provider. He worked as a livestock trader, a difficult profession that required a great deal of effort and frequent travel between different governorates. But it provided him with a source of income that allowed him to support his large family and give his children a decent life. Everyone who was asked about Fatih in his community, neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, described him in exactly the same way: a kind and compassionate man, known for his generosity. If he saw someone in need or struggling financially, he would immediately help them without thinking twice. He never asked why they needed the money or when they would pay him back. His philosophy in life was very simple: for the sake of God alone. In other words, he helped people purely for God's sake, without expecting anything in return or keeping track of what he had given. He believed that whatever money he gave in charity would come back to him many times over from God. And no matter who you asked about Fatih, no one would tell you that he had enemies. Simply put, this man had no enemies. He loved giving, and he loved seeing the people around him happy, even if it came at the expense of his own comfort. The police increased their efforts at that point and began investigating Fatih's circle of acquaintances, looking for any clue that could lead them to whoever was behind the crime. They reviewed his call records, asked his family about the last contact they had received from him, and tried to understand what he had been planning during the final days of his life. After some careful investigation, they discovered that 2 people owed Fatih a large amount of money: a man named Mohammed Khamis and his wife, Manal. The biggest surprise was that Khamis and Manal's home was very close to where the body had been found, just a short distance away on foot. This immediately placed them within the circle of suspicion, even before the police had any other evidence at that moment. Indeed, within just a few hours, the authorities managed to locate Kamis and Manal and arrested them so they could be formally questioned about their relationship with the victim. When the police asked them about their relationship with Fatih, they said that they had worked on a farm in Siwa, where Fatih had been responsible for supervising their work. After some time, they left the job and returned to their hometown in Beheira. The police asked them, "Why did you leave the job?" They replied that there had been a dispute over money. Then the police asked, "Was that the reason Fatih came here?" They answered, "Yes." But from that point on, their statements began to become inconsistent. It was extremely strange that Fatih had died in exactly the same area where they lived, while no one seemed to know anything about what had happened. From the very beginning of the interrogation, Kamis and Manal began avoiding the questions and getting caught up in unnecessary details. One moment they would say, "We don't know." Then, "I didn't do anything." Another time, "She was the one who made a mistake," or "He was the one who was wrong." But in the end, no one can hide the truth forever. After continued pressure during the interrogation, they confessed to the entire crime and revealed all the details that we are about to tell you. The truth is that the beginning of the story goes back a long time, specifically to January 2024, more than a year before the crime. At that time, Kamis and his wife Manal decided to leave Beheira and travel to Siwa after they were offered jobs at a farm there, with a slightly better salary than what they had been earning at the time. They traveled with their 2 young daughters and started a new life in Siwa. They stayed there for about 6 months. During that time, they got to know Fatih because he was responsible for supervising their work at the farm. From the very beginning, Fatih felt that this family was unfamiliar with the area and had no relatives or anyone around them who could help if they needed anything. So he decided on his own to treat them like his own family without them even asking him to. He helped them with almost everything. Sometimes he would even invite them to his home and have them sit with his family so they would feel that they were not alone and that they had someone they could rely on in their new surroundings. Their 2 young daughters needed medication, clothes, and basic necessities. Whenever Fatih found out that they needed something, he would try to provide it for them without hesitation. Sometimes he would give them an advance. Other times he would increase their wages from his own pocket, and on other occasions he would give them more money than they had originally agreed upon. He did all of this out of genuine kindness, without asking for anything in return or ever imagining that his generosity might one day be turned against him. But the problem is that when a person is greedy and always wants more, the kindness given to them can eventually become, in their eyes, an entitlement rather than a favor, something they feel they deserve instead of something they should appreciate. Over time, Kamis and Manal began asking for more and more money, and their visits to Fatih's home became increasingly frequent. The help that had initially been an exception gradually became the norm. It became something they expected, something they considered their right, and every time there was a new excuse. The girl is sick and needs medical tests. We need to furnish the house. We need this or that. The amounts kept increasing, payment after payment, until the total exceeded 100,000 Egyptian pounds, a huge amount of money for a simple man like Fatih. Eventually, Fatih began to feel that the situation had gone beyond humanitarian assistance and had turned into clear and deliberate exploitation. After all, he himself was supporting a large family of 9 people. He did not have the luxury of simply giving away money beyond what he could afford, especially as his own expenses were increasing every day. This man was now spending money on his own family and on Kamis and Manal at the same time, and he became unsure how to balance the two. Eventually, he began to feel that his finances simply could not take any more. One day, Fatih decided to speak to them honestly and confront them about the situation. He told them that he had suffered financially because of all the money he had been giving them, and that he could no longer continue helping them in the same way. He asked them to return the money he had lent them, or at least pay back part of it if they could not return the entire amount. Kamis and Manal should have appreciated everything Fatih had done for them and tried to return at least some of what they owed him. But exactly the opposite happened. The two of them gathered their belongings, left during the night, and returned to Beheira, abandoning their jobs, the farm, and everything behind them without even telling Fatih that they were leaving. Fatih, of course, did not remain silent, because that money represented a significant portion of his savings and the result of years of hard work. He began calling them and demanding that they return what they owed him. At first, he spoke to them calmly, but over time, he became increasingly persistent. These calls began to seriously annoy Kamis and Manal. Every time they saw Fatih's name appear on their phone, they became irritated. What had started as an ordinary debt had turned into a major problem that they could not seem to get rid of. They began to feel that Fatih would not leave them alone until he got all of his money back. At one point, Kamis, who was refusing to repay the debt, thought about using his wife Manal to try to resolve the problem. He asked her to get close to Fatih and attempt to entice him into an illicit relationship with her, hoping that he would either forget about the money or give up his claim to it. But Fatih completely refused. No matter how they tried to persuade him, his position was clear. He wanted nothing from them except the money he had lent them in good faith. When all their attempts failed and they realized that Fatih would not give up his rights or abandon the money he was owed, Kamis and Manal decided to come up with a much more dangerous plan. Manal called Fatih and spoke to him calmly. She told him that there was a major livestock deal in Beheira and that she would pay him everything they owed him from the proceeds of the deal. She also told him that he could make a good additional profit from the transaction. To make him believe her even more, she told him that her husband, Kamis, had been imprisoned in a case and was not at home. She presented the story in a way that made Fatih believe her, especially because he wanted to settle the money issue peacefully and recover what he was owed without any trouble. And so, on February 4, 2025, Fatih traveled from Siwa to Beheira. The journey was long and exhausting, and he was carrying extra money because he believed the deal would be a major one. He imagined that he would return with his money and make a good profit from the transaction as well. As soon as Fatih arrived, he went to Manal's house to collect his money first and then go see the livestock deal she had told him about. He entered the house feeling safe and confident because he believed he was visiting people he knew well. But the moment he stepped inside, he was shocked to find Kamis standing in front of him. This was the first sign that something was wrong because Manal had told him that her husband was in prison and was not at home. The bigger shock was that Kamis was not alone. Two other men were with him whom Fatih did not know. They were Mahmoud and Mohammed. Within moments, the entire situation changed. Instead of being an ordinary meeting, Fatih had walked straight into a trap. One of them struck him on the head with a heavy stick, while the other two attacked him with knives. According to what later emerged during the investigation, the original plan was not to kill him immediately. They had intended to restrain Fatih and film him in a compromising situation, then use the recordings to threaten his brother and demand money in exchange for his release. In other words, the plan began as a kidnapping and extortion scheme, but it ultimately turned into a full-blown murder. But Fathi did not submit quietly as they had expected. He fought back with all his strength. He began shouting loudly, yelling, "Help me! Help me!" trying to alert anyone who might be near the house or hear him from outside. His loud cries terrified the four of them because they realized that if someone actually heard him, the police could arrive immediately and they would all be arrested. At that exact moment, overwhelmed by fear and panic, they decided that the only solution was to silence him permanently before it was too late for them. Mahmoud stabbed him repeatedly in the abdomen with a knife, violently and over again, causing severe injuries. Amid the screams and the blood that covered the scene, Fathi took his final breath. The life of a man whom everyone who knew him described as kind had come to an end at the hands of people he himself had helped out of genuine goodwill. After carrying out the crime, the four men, overcome with panic and desperate to eliminate any evidence, stole all the money Fathi had with him. They then transported his body using a small tuk-tuk, carried it away from the house, and dumped it in the area where it was later discovered, hoping that no one would ever be able to trace the crime back to them. After the police learned all these details from Khamis and Manal's initial confessions, they immediately took action and arrested Mahmoud and Mohammed, the two men who had directly participated in carrying out the crime. This brought the total number of defendants to 4. The 4 were then referred to the public prosecution on charges of premeditated murder with prior planning and intent, one of the most serious charges under Egyptian law because it implies that the perpetrators planned the crime before carrying it out, rather than acting on a sudden impulse. The prosecution began gathering all the available evidence, including the forensic report, phone records between the defendants and the victim, and statements from neighbors and local residents who knew the parties involved. But when the trial began before the Damon Hour Criminal Court, something both strange and predictable happened. Each defendant began trying to shift the blame onto the others in an attempt to portray themselves as innocent as possible and minimize their own role in the crime. Mahmoud, for example, claimed that on the day of the incident, he had been outside the house with Khamis. According to his account, Khamis suddenly told him that they had to go back quickly because he had forgotten his phone inside. They returned to the house, but Mahmoud claimed that he remained outside waiting. Suddenly, he heard Khamis screaming inside, saying things like, "You betrayed me. You had a relationship with him." At the same time, he claimed he heard Manal screaming, "Don't kill him, Khamis." In other words, Mahmoud tried to convince the court that he had not been inside the house when the crime took place and that Khamis was the one who committed the murder out of jealousy. He even relied on the testimony of a witness who claimed that Mahmoud's clothes were completely clean after the crime, unlike Khamis's clothes, which were covered in blood and torn from the intensity of the struggle. But who actually confirmed the truth and completely turned Mahmoud's version upside down? Manal herself. During the investigation, she stated that there had indeed been an illicit relationship between her and Fathi, and that as soon as he entered the house, he went to the bathroom and changed his clothes before anything happened. A very simple question could potentially bring this entire story crashing down. If a man had supposedly come only to collect the money he was owed and then go see an ordinary livestock deal, why would he enter a house that was not his and change his clothes there? That made very little sense for a man who was supposedly there simply to handle a business matter. Another small detail that caught the investigators' attention and raised further suspicions was that Manal did not have her husband Khamis's phone number memorized, yet she knew Fathi's entire number by heart. It was a seemingly minor detail, but it was highly revealing when it came to the true nature of their relationship. Despite all of this, and despite the contradictions that emerged in her statements, Manal tried during the investigation to place the entire blame for the murder on Mahmoud. She continued to insist confidently that no one had touched Fathi except Mahmoud, not her husband, and not Mohammed. According to her new version of events, Mahmoud had suddenly lost control and killed Fathi on his own, without any involvement from the other three. The problem is that this entire version of events was completely different from what was said during the defendant's initial confessions to the public prosecution. At that time, all four of them, without exception, confirmed that they had agreed from the beginning to lure Fathi to the house and carry out the kidnapping plan. So, why did this new story suddenly appear in the middle of the trial, when the four of them could not even agree on who actually carried out the stabbing that ended the man's life? This contradiction in itself was strong evidence that the four defendants were trying to escape punishment rather than tell the truth. The logical interpretation that matched their initial confessions, as well as all the physical and forensic evidence collected by the prosecution, was simple and clear. They owed Fathi a large amount of money and did not want to repay it, not even part of it. So they brought in two of their acquaintances, Mahmoud and Mohammed, to carry out the crime on their behalf, hoping that afterward they could divide the money Fathi had with him among themselves and, at the same time, get rid of the debt once and for all. Everyone who was questioned in the area, and everyone who knew Fathi personally, confirmed one thing without disagreement. The man was respectable, and he had treated Khamis's family like his own. He had supported them out of genuine affection and compassion, not because he expected anything in return. Yet in the end, they betrayed him in the worst possible way, and turned all the kindness he had shown them into the very reason for his death. Fathi's own family also testified before the court that Manal had repeatedly tried, before the incident, to entice Fathi and attempt to photograph him in a compromising situation so that they could later use the images against him. According to the account presented in the case, this was part of the premeditated planning of the crime from the beginning. After the investigations were completed, all the statements had been heard, and the forensic report confirmed the details. The Daman-Our Criminal Court issued its decision during a hearing on June 25, 2025, referring the case files of the four defendants to His Eminence the Grand Mufti of Egypt. This is a procedural step that precedes the imposition of the death penalty under Egyptian law. Then, during the hearing on August 21, 2025, the court delivered its final verdict. All four defendants, Khamis, Manal, Mahmoud, and Mohammed, were sentenced to death by hanging as punishment for their actions. And with that, the Fathi Osman case reached its legal conclusion after a long journey of investigations and trial. It had begun with the mystery of a man's body found in an area where nobody knew him, and ended with a definitive verdict revealing that the perpetrators were among the people closest to the victim. This story is not simply an ordinary murder case that ends with a court verdict. It is a painful lesson about how some people can take advantage of kindness and turn it into an opportunity for betrayal and treachery, instead of returning kindness with kindness. We should learn from this story to be careful about whom we choose to trust, and never allow anyone to exploit our kindness at the expense of our lives, our security, or the future of our children. And with that, today's episode comes to an end. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you receive all the new episodes. See you in a new episode. Goodbye.